You're watching College Sports Rushes The 10 on the Bet Rivers Network.
Welcome to The 10, presented by Bet Rivers, a weekly Big Ten basketball podcast, part of the Bet Rivers Network. It is a great time to be doing a Big Ten basketball podcast. This conference is 8-0 outright, 8-0 against the spread in their first 8 games in the NCAA tournament. I've been enjoying every minute of this. I'm here with Doug Kaziri and Troy Macker. I'm your host, Greg Waddell. Let's go around the horn quickly, then we'll get right into the round of 32 games on the slate here. Doug, how surprised are you by the Big Ten's dominance through 2 days of this tournament?
Yeah, there's always a level of surprise anytime a conference has this sort of performance. But, you know, a lot of them were favorable situations where they were favorites. So it's just, were they willing to avoid the upset and open up a can? And, you know, to the degree, so I would say mildly surprised, right? Like, we expected them to advance, things along those lines. The question is, would they get tripped up? And teams like Illinois, we're going to talk about in a little bit, was one team I was worried about just because they had such inconsistency. But down the stretch of the season, they've flipped the switch. They've covered, I believe, 5 of their last 6. And I was surprised by some of them because I thought they had a tough sort of situation. Like we talked about the altitude for Wisconsin and Michigan. And obviously Michigan jumped out and had that good start and hung on by the end. So all in all, just mildly surprised to go undefeated against the spread, which is supposed to be the great equalizer. But, you know, they were the better teams, I believe, unless I'm forgetting something.
Troy, is this all going to come crashing down on us at some point in this tournament?
Potentially, yes. I don't know if it is on Sunday. I think there are some favorable matchups for these teams. But to just echo Doug's point, I mean, we've all heard, the Big Ten hasn't won a championship in 20 years. We all look at what conferences do, and we make big judgments based off that and realign what we think of the conferences as in a power rankings. But the surprise to me is not that it's 8-0. It's that, and not even 8-0 against the spread. It's just how much coverage they're having against the spread. I mean, the teams we're going to talk about today, they covered easily. I mean, I believe all 4 teams that are playing on Sunday won by almost 20 points each. I mean, in some were woodsheddings, bloodbaths. And I thought Grand Canyon would have a little bit more fight against Maryland. I thought Bryant would put up a little bit more fight against Michigan State. Now, granted, some of these teams played a competitive 17 or 18 minutes, but then the second half, the wheels fell off the train. So very surprised that it was as big of a shellacking that the Big Ten put on its opponents as just winning the games.
Yeah, to your point, the 8 wins for Big Ten teams in this tournament have come covering the spread by an average of 10.8 points ahead of the spread than expected. Now, that includes Michigan's close win, Purdue's close win, where I think they both covered by half a point. But there's been some blowouts, some wildly impressive performances. And I think it is a good reminder. Sometimes, even as someone who covers this league and bets this league, you can get kind of caught in the weeds of an 18-team conference and travel and where this is headed and teams with ups and downs, ebbs and flows of the season. This is an incredibly deep league with a lot of very good basketball teams. Maybe no great basketball teams, but those very good basketball teams were all favored this week. They all took care of business, and I think they all looked pretty happy to be out of Big Ten play, which was such a gauntlet for 3 or 4 months. All right, we've got 4 games for Sunday. We will go one by one through these. We also have done the episode for Saturday already, so if you're listening to that, you could get some last-minute handicapping in. We will have more coverage as this tournament progresses. Hopefully these Big Ten teams stay in it as long as possible, and we'll be here to help you break it down. We start our Sunday preview with Illinois and Kentucky, what surely promises to be an incredibly entertaining basketball game. Illinois -1.5, -120 on the money line. Kentucky even money to just win the game outright. Our total all the way up at 170. Doug, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a big number, but rightfully so. This, like you said, should be a very entertaining game up and down. I'm going to side with the Wildcats here, but both teams have been inconsistent at times this year, and they've both had some clunkers out there. And so which version are you going to get? I'm really not running to the window to anticipate either team's best performance because we've been burned too many times backing either throughout the season. But I've touched on it before. I love Illinois' ceiling, right? And we got glimpses of it in the last game. And I'm a big fan of Underwood, but this team's 3-point shooting leaves a lot to be desired. And they shot 40% in their opening game win. I just don't anticipate that type of shooting. The volume of attempts concern me. I believe they had 30 in the opener. So I'll side with Kentucky, but by no means is this with a great deal of confidence. I want to see Underwood make another run. So I'm rooting for Illinois, but I just, kind of like I've been burned a few too many times with the Illini.
Yeah, both these teams on the season are 500 against the spread, 17-17. And I've made jokes about it throughout the year. Kentucky is the SEC's version of Illinois. I mean, incredibly talented basketball team, a team that loves to get out, shoot a bunch of threes, that has wildly varying performances. If they hit their ceiling, they look unbeatable. If they hit their floor, they look like they can't beat anybody with a pulse. And it's hard to know who's going to show up. For that reason, I tend to lean with you, Doug. I think I want to back Kentucky to win this basketball game, but I'm certainly not comfortable enough to do so just because I don't trust them as much as I don't trust Illinois. I am leaning to the under here for my play in this game. It's a huge number. I want to see an entertaining basketball in this game. One of those where, I want to make my money, but if I lose this, it means we got to watch a great basketball game. There's two reasons, though, that I think the under could come into play here. Number one, we know that Illinois is a team, when they're missing their shots, they really thrive on generating second chance opportunities, beating teams up on the boards. They did that to Michigan and Ann Arbor a couple weeks ago and just ran them off the court even when they were cold. Kentucky is a very good defensive rebounding team. It's really the only thing they do defensively that stands out well on the profile. They're 23rd in the country at preventing offensive boards. They're pretty big. Amari Williams is going to hold up well in this game. And then on the flip side, Kentucky's offense, it can be great when they make their shots, much like Illinois, but they're so three-point dependent, especially with their injuries. And schematically, Illinois' defense does a pretty great job of running teams off the three-point line. They're the third best three-point volume defense in college basketball. The whole scheme is to force tough twos. They've been pretty great at that this season. So I think you can see two teams offensively, even if they are making shots, maybe frustrated that the defense they're playing is taking them out of a portion of what they rely on consistently. And if one of these two teams goes cold, 170 is such a huge number. I feel like that's all we need to go under. That's my play. Troy, I'll throw it to you for any additional insights you can add on this one.
Yeah, at 170, that is just a huge number, and the public seems to agree here. 95% of the money and 70% of the tickets is on the under. And we rarely do we have a strong public under, but I think this is the one, and I think it has all to do with 3-pointers. Kentucky's a pretty decent 3-point defense. They're top 30 in their opponents' 3-point percentage, allowing their opponents to shoot just a shade over 30%. And Illinois horribly inconsistent at shooting the three ball. Not just inconsistent, but to Doug's point, ill-advised 3-pointers, not really schematic, efficient 3-point shooting team. It's never really in their flow. So I think a team that is good defending the 3-pointer and a team that doesn't always take the right 3-pointers, that could lean towards the under, even though that Kentucky is not great at 2-point field goals. But here's an interesting one. Kentucky, as we know, is always in the tournament, and they're always making long runs for each of the last 10 or 15 years. Each of Kentucky's last 32 NCAA tournament games have produced a total lower than 170. I mean, 32 tournament games, that's basically all of John Calipari's tenure here. And, I know this is Mark Pope's first tournament run with Kentucky. They play really hard. They're going to get out and run. They're not always the smoothest offensive team. I'm not saying this is going to be a rock fight, but this could be a brutish heavyweight battle that is not technically appealing, but it is appealing if you do like some entertainment. So, the play for me here would have to be the under, and I'd lean towards the Cats. The public is the same way. 59% of the money is on Illinois to win. 59% of the tickets is on Kentucky to win. On the spread, at 1.5, it's basically a pick 'em. 65% of the money is on Illinois. 60% of the tickets are on Kentucky. So the only real bet here with conviction that the public is on at Bet Rivers thus far is under 170.
Yeah, I think that feels right to me. Like I would expect the entire world to be very split on where this game is going. Two very two-sided basketball teams. I can't wait to see what happens. Let's move to our second game here. We've got Maryland against Colorado State. Colorado State pulled the quote-unquote upset seed-wise over Memphis in the first round. They're actually favored in that game. Vegas putting a lot of love on this Rams team that seemingly hasn't lost since Valentine's Day, which is crazy. Maryland 7.5-point favorites, minus 315 on the money line at Bet Rivers. Colorado State plus 245 to win outright. Our total is 142.5. Doug, who you got?
I'm going to lay it with the Terps. They always talk about the lack of depth, excuse me, for Maryland and the quick turnaround in terms of playing. It's not that big of a deal. These guys are young kids. I think the conference tournaments, when you have multiple games in a row in as many days, that's when it really rears its ugly head, as we saw with Wisconsin in the championship game, last Sunday, just the 4 games in 4 days. But I just think where CSU has shined in that conference tournament run in the Mountain West and during the season, like you said, since Valentine's Day, is really the athleticism of some of their best players and things along those lines. And I just think they kind of meet their match here with the Terrapins. I just don't see how they're gonna, unless they shoot the lights out. I don't see this. I see them really struggling to get their offense going. And I like CSU. I think they're really well coached. I've backed them. There's just a lot to like, and Clifford's going to do his thing, fill up the stat sheet. But I do think his athletic sort of advantage he has in a lot of games will be neutralized here, and they run so much through him. I think ultimately Maryland's going to have too many 12-3 runs, 13-6 runs with timeouts followed it. I just think they pull away and win by double digits.
Yeah, I'm going to side with you here, Doug. I think this is about as good of a matchup for Maryland as they could have asked for in the round of 32. Colorado State, very good basketball team. I totally agree with your read that in the Mountain West they found success because it feels like athletically they are superior to most Mountain West teams. Not going to be the case here. Colorado State trots out a front line that goes 6'8", 6'7" in the front court. Maryland should be licking their chops with Julian Reese and Derek Queen getting 40 minutes of that. Colorado State doesn't really go to their bench. That's something I was worried about from Maryland. Would they run into a team with a lot of depth, second game in 3 days that could maybe get to them a little bit? In the first game against Memphis, Colorado State played 4 of their 5 starters, 30-plus minutes. Ethan Morton, former Big Ten guy, is kind of the sixth man. He led the bench in minutes with just 15. So I don't think Maryland's depth is really going to hurt them here. I expect Queen and Reese to really feast inside. It's going to come down to just, can they contain Clifford at all? And obviously Clifford is a good enough player. He's such a mismatch, 6'6", 200 on the wing with guard skills. He is a guy who can single-handedly win a game in March or at least cover a 7.5-point spread in March. But I kind of trust what we've seen from Maryland defensively. With that 5-man lineup, you've got 2 different guys in Selton Miguel and Rice that are big enough to frustrate bigger wings like that. And Nick Clifford is a guy, too. He wants to get to the rim a little bit. Easier said than done with Queen and Reese roaming in the paint. So I think over a 40-minute game, Maryland should extend this out. I think it will be more competitive than the Grand Canyon matchup for sure. But Maryland's just too good right now. I'm so impressed with that 5-man lineup. I expect them to cover this number at the end of this game. Troy, what trends can you add for us here in this one?
Yeah, while it's not a sexy number, I would definitely take Maryland to win this game. Certainly, it's going to be something you probably want to add to a parlay at minus 315. But here's an interesting trend that really lends to that. Maryland has won 22 of its last 25 NCAA games against double-digit seeds. They obviously beat Grand Canyon, a double-digit seed. Now they get another double-digit seed. That plays a little bit favorably. While they do have some, historic upsets on their belt, this is not a team that succumbs to, shocking upsets to double-digit seeds. Now, granted, we are talking about Kevin Willard, who has not been at Maryland for that long in terms of having, tournament resume. But I think that Maryland wins this game. 7.5 is a very juicy number. The public seems to think that as well. 67% of the money is on Maryland to cover, but 58% of the tickets is on Colorado State. And over under, we're talking 54% of the money and 81% of the tickets is on over. It's 142.5. I think this game goes just over. Maryland went under 149 in their first game. Colorado State went over 146.5. I think this is played, in the high 140s. Colorado State, good defense, hasn't conceded 73 or fewer points in 11 straight games. 8 of Maryland's last 9 games against non-conference opponents have produced a total of 141 or over. So, I think Maryland can get what they want at the basket. One of the ways you stop Maryland is you even though they have 2 bigs, is you really defend in the low paint, get blocks. I've echoed the Michigan State game. Michigan State, not a huge team, but they were blocking shots, pinning balls back, putting them into the second row seemingly every time. And that really slows down what Maryland wants to do. While they have two big men, they play kind of below the basket, underneath the rim. So unfortunately, Colorado State, not great at that regard. So I think that Maryland can impose their will. And it's going to come down to three-point shooting. Colorado State does have a good three-point shooter, but Maryland has multiple guys, and I think that's going to be the case. I don't know if they win by 30 like they did against Grand Canyon, but I do think Maryland wins, and I would lean towards them covering, but I think it will be somewhere between 5 and 10 points.
Yeah. You mentioned the coaching matchup too. Interesting note on this for me is the fact that both Kevin Willard and Nico Medved are maybe keeping an eye elsewhere on the job board right now. So that's always an interesting situational spot. There's rumors Kevin Willard's being courted by Villanova. He's been putting their former athletic director on blast at the podium every single game, and Nico Medved is all but headed to Minnesota as soon as the season ends. So somebody's got to win. Something's got to give. Sounds like we all lean to the Terps on this one. Let's move to game 3. Michigan State and New Mexico. New Mexico got here by defeating Marquette, a moneyline underdog win under their belt already. Let's see if they can do it again. They are plus 245 on the money line. Michigan State favored by 7, minus 315 if you are looking to put that in a parlay. And then our total at Bet Rivers is at 148.5. Doug, what are you thinking here?
So I like the favorite here. I did like New Mexico in the outright win in the previous round. I actually thought I had a little conspiracy theory that Pitino would ask his dad, get some good input on how to beat a Marquette team, having faced them in the Big East. I also am not a big fan of this Marquette team, a little on the soft side. But I will say New Mexico, they had a very similar box score as Marquette, except for the line. They got to the 9 more free throws, 18 of 21 from the stripe. And, I live out here in Vegas in Mountain West country, so I pay attention to the teams. I thought the Lobos and the Rams were the two teams that could make a little bit of a run, at least get out of the first round, which is something that the Mountain West hasn't been able to say very often. But the Lobos, they have their dominant home court. And outside of that and outside of the, bad teams, they really didn't do much on the road. And I know the quick turnaround, and Pitino is a good coach. That's one thing, and Medved is too. But I think that's really important with the quick turnaround, because you focus so much on that first opponent, unless you're like a 1 seed or a 2 seed and can just kind of do what you want to do and not worry about it. And you kind of scout the teams you might play in the second round. So this is a quick, less than 48 hours. You gotta get to know your opponent and things like that. And then talent typically just sort of wins out in this situation. So I like New Mexico State. They obviously have a great guard. New Mexico. But I'm just gonna go with Sparty and Izzo. How can you not? Now it's a number. It's a big number. It's not just asking who to win. But I think Michigan State just goes on those runs. And again, kind of like the last match, like the other matchup we talked about with Maryland, just a little too much athleticism for Sparty here.
Yeah, I will say, similar to my analysis of the Maryland matchup here, I think this is about as good of a draw as Michigan State could have hoped for in the round of 32. No disrespect intended to Donovan Denton, New Mexico, and Richard Pitino, who I think have all done a stellar job this season. But this is a New Mexico team that ranks 284th in bench minutes nationally. They are not deep. They really play a sixth man, and that's about it in a game like this, at least. And we have seen time and time again for 2.5 months, Michigan State go one by one and dismantle every other team in the 18-team Big Ten by wearing them down over 40 minutes with their depth, with bodies flying around, with fresh legs late. This is the best second-half team in the country. And that was the story against Bryant, who, as you mentioned earlier, Troy, they showed up for 17, really 20 minutes. That was a competitive basketball game. Michigan State covers the pregame number with ease, just with a dominant second half. I think we're going to see that in the second of 3 days, second game in 3 days for both these teams. New Mexico, you can't beat Michigan State with a one-dimensional superstar approach, especially if that one-dimensional superstar is a small guard, and Donovan Dent is sensational. But Michigan State is going to throw Jeremy Fears at him, Jaden Akins at him, Trey Holloman at him, Jace Richardson at him. good luck. Like that's the strength of this Michigan State defense is physicality at the guard spots. And I just expect them to cause Dent problems. If you don't get an A-plus game from Donovan Dent here, I certainly wouldn't feel good backing New Mexico on the number. The one concern I will just raise is that Junior Joseph should hold up really well against the Michigan State front court. I mean, he's one of the best rebounders in the country. He's been up for the challenge against big teams, good opponents, 19-7 against Marquette. I think even with a good game from him, though, the guard spots are going to be too much for this New Mexico team to handle from the Spartans. If you do want to back the Lobos, I would look at the first half number. Maybe a little reverse correlation play here. New Mexico first half, Michigan State to cover or win the game. That has my full attention. Troy, I'll throw it to you for any trends that you can add.
Yeah, of New Mexico's 34 games they've played this year, 30 of them, they've scored at least 70 points. Can you envision New Mexico scoring 70 points against this Michigan State team, a team that can throw multiple players at multiple positions, a team that plays a glacial pace, and one of the best unders teams in the country? I cannot. So I'm leaning towards the under 148.5. The public at Bet Rivers is the same. 70% of the money is on the under. 64% of the tickets are on the over. Those are early tickets. With this being a Sunday game, we'll see that potentially come down. And the reason I'm if I'm not going to bet the under one, the play is not currently available. It will be closer to game time. Is under New Mexico's team total. I just think they're not going to be able to get what they want from players other than Donovan Dent and potentially Nelly Jr. Joseph, like you echoed, Greg. I think this is going to be a Michigan State win, and if they can do what they've done in the second half and most of their wins down the stretch, I think it's going to be tough sledding for New Mexico. The public is easily on Michigan State to win outright. 88% of the money, 92% of the tickets at Bet Rivers, and spread is also on Michigan State. It's not split or anything. 67% of the money, 65% of the tickets on Sparty -7. That is a big number, but I do think these second halves and them playing suffocating defense, and you really have to have multiple guys to really even have a chance at picking Michigan State apart because they are so versatile in who they throw at you. And while they're not a big team, they are a very athletic team, and I think that is going to pose threats for New Mexico. So, my play would probably be on the under, but I do think that Michigan State it all depends on how electric they can be in the second half. So I would definitely lean towards New Mexico's under team total. You're going to have to wait to see what that is, but I do not think they score 70 points as they've done in all but 4 games this year. I think this is a Michigan State team that is going to advance.
The wheels are churning a little bit for me here. Michigan State and Maryland moneyline parlay -139 at Bet Rivers. I don't hate that at all. Let's throw it to our fourth game here, an old Pac-12 matchup. Oregon and Arizona. Oregon is an underdog here, +145 on the money line. Arizona -4, -177 on the money line. Our total is 153. What do you think, Doug?
This is one of my favorite things about the tournament. We all love Thursday and Friday. I just like the night game Sunday night. You get the late start Saturday, but you get all these late games Sunday night just to finish strong. And this is the finale of the opening weekend, and it should be a good one. I'm a little surprised the line's 4. There's some 3.5s popping up. I made this number like 1.5, 2. It's 3 at Ken Palm. I just think it's too many points. I think you got Dana Altman with a coaching edge, not a huge one, but an edge that I like. Now, this Arizona team has the talent, but just they haven't delivered much of the season. But you can say the same about the Ducks. It's just this one's just straight street cred on Oregon. They have the pieces. Biddle's been a little inconsistent, and they have. I mean, the win at Wisconsin showed what this team can do. Now, that was a comeback late, but just in general, we've seen this team deliver. And obviously this time of year, I just don't want to bet against Altman. I think this is when coaches really flex. I mentioned it a little bit ago, the quick turnaround for teams that, advance on a Thursday, Friday and what they can do. If you look at the last month, they were ripping through teams, 7 or 8 straight wins and then lose to Michigan State, which is, nothing to be embarrassed about. They opened a can on Liberty, which was a nice cover. They were big favorites at 7-ish. And I think it's too many points. I think just line value here, I got to take the dog.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning Oregon's been pretty awesome as a neutral court team this year. I mean, they had the loss to Michigan State in the Big Ten tournament. But outside of that, They've won 6 neutral court games. You think back to that Players Era Festival at the beginning of the year, they were untouchable outside of the Big Ten Conference. I do think there is something to that. I mean, I don't know how you could watch their performance against Liberty late last night with Jackson Shellstad setting the tone. He's just a big game guy. He's got something the analytics can't really define. And it's been there his entire career, but it's certainly showing up at the right time. That game was over before it started because Shellstad just came out of the gates roaring with a couple of huge jumpers. He was diving on the floor, creating turnovers. I just trust that guy more than I trust Arizona's guy in Caleb Love. And that alone is worth me sprinkling on the plus 145 here. These are two teams that I think are, both very good across the board. Maybe nothing elite that either team does. There's a lot of green on these profiles. Both have 7-footers down low. Both have erratic guards that have high upside. But to me, as you mentioned, Doug, they've got a slight coaching advantage with Dana Altman and what he's done in the tournament. I think they have a slight superstar advantage with Shellstad and how he's looked in big games this year against Caleb Love. For me, you add those two together, it makes Oregon the right play here. I'll sprinkle the underdog on the money line. Troy, what do you have for this one from an insights perspective?
The public money is currently on Oregon to win outright 72%, which is a strong play. Arizona, however, Oregon is 66% of the tickets. So there is at least some tickets and potentially parlays backing the Ducks. I, too, think that plus 145 is a great number, specifically, because at -4 in 1-2 possessions, I could see this game being, a big win. Not a huge win, but a big win for either side. And frankly, I just like Oregon's roster a little bit better than Arizona's. You're talking about TJ Bamba, Supreme Cook, who's a former Georgetown guy. Jackson Solstead, as you mentioned, and obviously Nate Biddle. I think they have more pieces. Caleb Love is going to have to do far more of the heavy lifting. Now, he has been able to do that at times this year, but I don't know if he's going to get the supporting cast output that they need against the team that seems to play better and better every time they step foot on the court in March. Some of the other numbers we're looking at, 61% of the money and 74% of the tickets are on Oregon. That's pretty decisive to the underdog. 61% of the money and 68% of the tickets at BetRivers are on over 153.5. Oregon has won 12 straight non-conference games, and Oregon has scored 76 or more points in each of its last 12 teams against non-conference opponents. Now, it's funny saying that because for our entire lives, Oregon and Arizona were conference opponents, but not this year. And I think, like you said, playing on neutral court has been advantageous for Oregon. And there's just the factor of certainly Arizona has succumbed to a lot of tournament pressures. Now, against very lower seeds. They're the only team in NCAA history to lose to a 13, 14, and 15 seed. Certainly Oregon's not that, but they haven't been able to get it done. Oregon has been able to get it done, and I think it continues with Oregon pulling off the upset and cashing a good money line ticket at plus 145.
Yeah, it's great value there. All right, love to see the three of us in agreement. You have it. There's our Sunday preview. A lot to like, a lot to potentially choose from a betting perspective. Let's wrap with our favorite play for Sunday. Doug, what's your best bet?
Imitation is the most sincerest form of flattery. Greg, I'm going to piggyback off what you suggested with the money line parlay. I was tied, but, I like both favorites minus the points, but it could, look, it's the tournament. It's the madness of March. We could get a little wonky. Maybe one team leads at halftime and you're laying 7.5. So I really think there's a cheap money line with both Sparty and Maryland. I just, for all the reasons we touched on, they say with the old parlay thing, you just play there. You really shouldn't do it. I know the recreational bettors intimidated and wants to do a money line, but like I would do the money line, just straight play on each of these. I mean, that's what you always want to align your bet with exactly what the team is trying to do, right? They're just trying to survive in advance. So betting a money line minus $3 or whatever it is not the worst thing in the world. I know it's not something you want to do every day because it's just tough to beat, but there is said value on favorites. It's just not a common discussion and a frequent discussion, but I do think it exists. I don't see Maryland losing this game or Sparty. I think the Sparty money line's better because I'm more secure in this Izzo's ability to push the right buttons if something goes wrong or guys aren't hitting shots, and he has more depth and wiggle room and more options. So that's the money line I prefer to play. So maybe I'll do something along those lines, maybe a larger play on Sparty money line, but I do see those two advancing. So for the sake of trying to do almost straight picks and -110, let's do the money line parlay.
Doug, I'm in lockstep with you here, and it's great to hear my proposal buffed up a little bit from you. Look, this has been a very chalky tournament. There's two matchups here that should be chalky. It's Maryland and Michigan State. These are two of the three best teams in this conference from start to finish. Mountain West opponents are standing in their way from a Sweet 16. I'd be pretty stunned if either one of these teams dropped this game. So I'm with you. Lock it in. If I had to go elsewhere, I do like that under from Illinois, Kentucky. But, man, as we laid out, I think Oregon, Arizona, Illinois, Kentucky should be very hotly contested games. I'm going to stick with what we feel comfortable with, which is Michigan State and Maryland to find a way to get it done. All right, there you have it. Make sure with Bet Rivers that you check out the house specials page. They've got daily boosted bets, special props for the NCAA tournament, and keep listening to future episodes of The 10. This has been a very fun postseason run for us. We are your weekly Big Ten basketball podcast, part of the Bet Rivers Network. We'll have more in store for you as the NCAA tournament progresses, and hopefully these Big Ten teams keep getting it done, cashing tickets for us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching College Sports Rushes the 10 on the Bet Rivers Network.